What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel and welcome to the first video on my channel in which I am talking about one of the biggest television shows of all time that many people have many opinions about, and it's so fun going through all of the takes and all of the unpopular opinions and the extremely healthy, non-toxic fandom of this show. Nobody has ever belittled another person in any internet comment section in regards to this show. Truly, it's incredible how healthy of a fan base that this show has bred. Yeah, we're talking about The Walking Dead today. There's a lot of things that I could say about The Walking Dead that might be somewhat controversial, but there's almost nothing I could say about The Walking Dead that would not be an opinion held by a sizable number of people, which is the interesting thing about it. I've been very silent about the show on my channel. I think the only time I've ever actually talked about it is once in my last video when I was referencing AMC and HBO dramas. I didn't give any opinions on it. I just named The Walking Dead as a hardcore drama show. And then a couple years ago on a live stream I did when somebody asked me who my favorite Walking Dead character was. Other than that, those are the only two times I've ever talked about it, but I've never dedicated any significant portion of a video or an entire video as a whole, such as this one, to talking about the show. And that, my friends, has obviously changed. And I have to be fully transparent with you guys right off the bat. I have watched the vast majority of this show, like chronologically all the way through. I've sat down and watched, pretty much binged, all the way from season 1 to about halfway through season 10. And then life sort of got in the way and I sort of fell off out of a lot of shows that I was watching at the time, and I just never got around to getting back on board with the show. Now I'm in my second semester of college. I'm living in my own apartment. I'm paying rent. I have a job, and it's weird, and I don't know, it's just I'm sort of like living the first part of my adult life, my life as an adult outside of high school, and so I've just taken on all these new responsibilities. I've gone through so many life changes over the past years, particularly the last 200 days. Don't ask me why I'm being so specific. Ironically enough, with all of these new responsibilities has brought me a fair amount of free time as well, and also just like the freedom to manage my own time and not have it managed for me by a parental figure or what have you, you know, like any like high school administration, counselor, schedule, you know, all those things. I'm sort of in control of the vast majority of that now, which is really nice actually. And with this newfound responsibility, like I said, has come this also newfound free time in which I'm able to make content much more consistently. My channel is sort of at a peak right now. It's not like I'm to the point of, you know, I'm no Chris Stuckman or Jeremy Johns or Flickpit. Like I'm like nobody. I have like what, 300 subscribers at the moment. I am nobody in the eyes of YouTube. I'm just a tiny little speck in the grand scheme of the whole YouTube algorithm. But for me, for my experience, especially in comparison to how my channel is done in this 5 years that it has existed, I'm definitely at a really good spot right now. More people are watching. I've gained a fair amount of subscribers, just like relatively speaking, and that's been awesome. And as you can probably assume, since I have more free time to make content, that also means I have more free time to watch stuff to make content about, which is why I did my video on Society of the Snow, which is by far my most successful video to date. It's also why I've been doing videos on BoJack Horseman, because I actually have time to sit down and watch all of these things that I've been meaning to watch forever that I just never had the time to. And The Walking Dead is one of the biggest, I would say greatest shows of all time, and we're gonna get into my opinions on each and every season throughout whatever this series is going to be when it comes to me covering each season. And I am so excited to finally be talking about this show in depth on my channel, because it's been one of my favorite shows for a very long time, despite all the highs and lows, and we'll talk about all of those. But overall, The Walking Dead is a show that genuinely has a very special place in my heart. I didn't really start watching it when the hype around it was so big, and this is the case for like most things. Like, I didn't start watching BoJack Horseman until the show had already ended. Now granted, I did start watching The Walking Dead, I think when it was in the middle of its 9th season. I think like as the 9th season was about to end, that's when I started watching the show, and I binged the first 6 seasons of the show, because this was one of those shows that was always a no-no in any household that I was living in for a very, very long time. My parents obviously now know that I watch the show and that I'm a fan of the show, and that definitely started like later in high school, like late junior year, senior year. I could openly talk about The Walking Dead and not be scared of getting in trouble or anything. But no, I definitely started watching it like before that for sure. I think I started watching it in like 2019. And in order to avoid my parents finding out anything about me watching the show, I binged the first 6 seasons of the show on 123 Movies. I would prefer not to pirate media, and thankfully now, since I can watch anything I fucking want to, I try my best to not pirate media. But at the time, I was a naive little freshman in American high school. What was I gonna do? If I wanted to watch The Walking Dead and my parents didn't want me to watch The Walking Dead, I was gonna find a way to watch The Walking fucking Dead. Do you think there's, how do I say this without getting demonetized? I say that like I'm monetized in the first place. Do you think that there's like a corn parody of The Walking Dead called The Fucking Dead? Anyway, this intro and this sort of deep dive into my introduction to The Walking Dead has gone on way too long. Unlike my BoJack Horseman videos, we are going to be talking about any and all spoilers to do with The Walking Dead, given the respective season that I'm talking about in whatever given video of this series. For example, in this video, we're talking about season 1, so you can expect major spoilers for season 1 of the show in this video. Also, this isn't really going to be a deep dive into the behind the scenes stuff. I have done a lot of research on that stuff, and so if I have any commentary that adds anything to the table when it comes to that stuff, I might jump in, but I really just solely want to focus on the show as a show, regardless of what was going. Guys, I live in downtown Cleveland, and I kid you not, there were literal gunshots right outside my window just now. Yeah, I heard it too. Of course, the only 2 people who stepped out into the hallway to see if everything was okay was me and the other person who wasn't born and raised in Cleveland, because to everybody else, that's just day-to-day life. Honestly, that's just day-to-day life for any American. Anyway, let's start this deep dive into The Walking Dead. I binged the entire first season, which really isn't saying that much in comparison to how long some of the future seasons get. This first season, I think a lot of people forget, was only 6 episodes long, and with the way it wraps up, sort of works as its own contained miniseries. If the show had ended after this first season, I don't think anybody would have had any complaints, and I honestly think it would have garnered a sort of a reputation like Band of Brothers, for example, where it was just like, people were like, oh, there could be more seasons, but like, no, like, you just had this one season of the show, and it works super well. You don't have to tell any more of the story, because it just works so well contained to those 6 to 10 episodes. Not comparing Walking Dead to Band of Brothers in the sense that they're similar in story and adaptation, because Walking Dead is based off of a comic book series, and Band of Brothers is obviously based on true events. But I'm just saying, reception speaking, and just business-wise, they both work super well within their own right as their own contained sort of like low number of episode seasons. And given the legacy and the pop culture sensation that The Walking Dead eventually became through its triumph of a 10 to 11 year run, I think it's really easy for people to forget about its roots and what made the show great in the first place, because shows don't just go on a triumphant run the way Walking Dead did. That first season, the catalyst of the show, has to be something truly special. Guys, why do I keep on hearing gunshots? You know what? Whatever's going on out there, it doesn't concern me. That person doesn't know who I am, I don't know who they are, and they don't know that I'm in here right now, aside from my very bright-ass fucking ring light. Anyway, basically, I'm super excited to be talking about season 1 of the show, because after rewatching it, even I genuinely forgot how incredible this first season was. Walking Dead would not be what it eventually became without this first season being as great as it was. If this first season just phoned it in, it was just sort of like a decent, run-of-the-mill zombie show, there's no way that The Walking Dead would have reached the levels of greatness that it did in later seasons. And not even greatness in regards to the quality of the show, but just the pop culture phenomenon, the absolute phenomenon that it became, where it became one of those shows that everyone was watching, you know? For adults, they would go to work in the morning, they'd be like, hey, did you see last night's episode of The Walking Dead? That was crazy. Everyone at school would be like, oh yeah, I'm binging The Walking Dead on Netflix right now. Like, it was one of those things. None of that would have happened if this first season did not stick the first landing, which this first season absolutely did. And we're gonna go through each episode here, but that is a formula that I might have to forfeit in later seasons when we get into the supersized seasons that are like, you know, 20 to 24 episodes. I mean, I don't know, I kind of like talking about each and every episode, so we might, but I know for this first season it'll be somewhat easy because there's only 6. The pilot episode of The Walking Dead, I think, is viewed as one of the best pilots for a show of all time. It's almost a feature-length film within its own right when it comes to runtime, and it sets up this world beautifully. Basically, in this episode, we're introduced to our protagonist. His name is Rick Grimes. He is a police officer. Basically, right before the outbreak, Rick was shot right in front of his best friend Shane, who was basically his partner in the police force, and this sent Rick into a coma. Our episode opens with Rick waking up from that coma to find the world in desolation. Everything is destroyed, there's dead bodies everywhere. We instantly are introduced to the walkers and the dangers of them, and it does a very good job at building up the dread around the walkers. And walkers has always been, for me, the definitive title for the undead. Like, obviously zombie is like the biggest one, but you know, when it's got to the point where in normal conversation, whenever the concept of zombies come up, I just accidentally start referring to them as walkers. That's truly a testament to how big of an impression this show left on me. The way they build up the dread of these walkers with the famous don't open dead inside, or don't dead open inside, or don't inside dead open, I don't fucking know. It's one of the eeriest images in horror television, and it did a really good job, especially in the sound design aspects of it, at building up the tension of these creatures. And this isn't a beat by beat recap of each and every episode. I'm just sort of talking about generally what happens in each episode and what I think about it. Basically, Rick escapes the hospital, he goes to his home, finds that his family is gone, and then he runs into Morgan and his son Dwayne, who are surviving in somebody's home. I mean, most people are gone at this point, so they're taking shelter in someone's home. They've boarded up all the windows, they keep it very low light at night with only some candles and a couple lamps here and there. And it's through Morgan and Dwayne that Rick finds out exactly what happened. I mean, not exactly what happened, you know, this is sort of a running thing with the show. We don't really know exactly what happened, but just he informs him of the general idea that people are dying and coming back to life, and they will rip you to pieces and eat you. They are zombies for all accounts and purposes. Now, a criticism some people have thrown at this episode is how quickly Rick seems to accept that this has happened, but honestly, I don't think it's that big of a deal, because you also have to remember, like, he remembers everything he saw in the hospital after he woke up. When he walked outside, he saw that girl cut in half, that zombie girl cut in half laying on the lawn, like all those dead bodies and what he saw on the street and everything. Like, I don't think it's too far-fetched to suggest that when Morgan explains this to him, that it's somewhat easy, at least, it may not be easy to accept, but undeniably, he has to accept that this is what is happening. Like, when Morgan tells him that, what else is Rick gonna think? I mean, he's seen it for himself pretty much at this point. Anyway, eventually Rick decides to head off on his own to the city of Atlanta because he thinks that that's where his family would have fled, according to Morgan. It was said that there was going to be sort of a safe haven there run by the military, so Rick sets off at the end of this episode to Atlanta, and it provides us with some of the most iconic visuals in cinema in general. I was gonna say in television, I was gonna say specifically in horror television, but no. I think it's safe to say that just as far as pop culture goes, these are some of them. This right here is one of the most iconic images of all time. It starts off very, very peaceful as Rick is riding this horse through downtown Atlanta, and then he comes across a massive horde of zombies, and he takes shelter in a tank, and we hear the voice of Glenn, who is a character that we're not technically introduced to by name in this episode yet, but his voice starts coming over the radio inside of the tank. Rick is trapped, he's cornered, and that's where our episode ends. As a first episode of the show, it is truly incredible. I think it did everything just right. I truly love how it sets everything up. It is such a masterfully crafted introduction to this very, very bleak and albeit terrifying world, and I think everyone just did an amazing job. I mean, Andrew Lincoln is one of the best actors of our time. Now, it But it is worth noting that we also find out in this pilot episode that Rick's family is in fact safe. Lori, his wife, and Carl, his son, are safe with Shane, Rick's best friend, who I alluded to earlier. They are safe at sort of this camp that they have right outside of Atlanta on top of this hill right next to a quarry. It's revealed that Shane was under the belief at this point in the season that Rick was dead, and he has sort of filled the role of Lori's partner. I mean, these two are getting down and dirty with each other as far as Lori is concerned. She has believed Shane's lies that Rick is dead, and Shane, as a result, is, you know, filling in that father figure role for Carl as well. Once Rick gets out of the tank, he meets this group in the city, which consists of Glenn, who is the main guy who helps him get out of the tank, and a fan favorite character. This group also includes Andrea and T-Dog, characters that I had almost forgotten about, just given the way the rest of the show plays out. And of course, Merle, who is a volatile racist, not even implied, just a downright self-proclaimed racist. I mean, he's dropping hard ERs every chance he gets. Basically, this group that Rick is now kind of involuntarily a part of is trapped in this building, and Rick ends up handcuffing Merle to the rooftop because Merle is perceived as a danger to everyone else, and rightfully so. He's out of control, losing his mind, and he's just a dick. The group is making a plan to escape the city to reconnect with the group that Shane is a part of, and we do learn that this is all one group, and this group was sent to Atlanta to do a supply run of sorts, and, you know, it didn't go so well because there's a shit ton of walkers because of Rick entering the city and firing off gunshots and awaking the horde. So they have a very, very smart idea that I'm honestly pissed they don't exercise more throughout the show. It's sort of only done this once, maybe a couple other times, but it's never really acknowledged again how good of an idea this is, because it works very well for a long time. In fact, the only reason it doesn't work is because it starts raining, and that is gutting a walker, covering yourself in the— it's gross, but gutting a walker, covering yourself in the gut so that the other walkers don't pick up on your scent, and then you can walk through a horde of walkers and they won't even know that you're human. They won't come after you. They just think you're one of them. It's really, really smart. Rick and Glenn are the ones who are tasked with actually walking out and going through with this plan. They return with vehicles and rescue the group, and in all of the chaos, T-Dog trips, drops the key to the handcuffs, and Merle is left handcuffed to that roof, completely abandoned. This is one of the most thrilling episodes of the show, in my opinion. I truly forgot how masterful these suspense sequences were crafted. And that's another thing too. The filmmaking on display, particularly in the earlier seasons of The Walking Dead, is of the quality of some of the best horror and zombie thriller cinema that we've ever had, in my opinion. In episode 3, Rick is reunited with his family, and the group is reunited just as a survival group. And of course, that's when Lori becomes super pissed at Shane, rightfully so, because in her eyes, Shane lied about Rick dying just to fill his role. We meet a lot of survivors in this group, such as Dale, Jim, and Carol, and also Ed, Carol's abusive husband. Boy, isn't that guy a dick. Also part of this group is Merle's younger brother, Daryl, who is not too happy about the fact that his brother was left for dead on top of a skyscraper in the middle of Atlanta. So of course, he is tasked along with a couple others to go back and try to rescue Merle. But all they find is a bloody saw and Merle's severed hand, implying that Merle obviously sawed off his hand to get away. In episode 4, Jim is sort of haunted by this dream that he had the previous night and starts digging a bunch of holes on top of a peak next to this survivalist camp, much to the confusion of everybody else and us as the audience as well. And while our group with Rick, Daryl, and Glenn and T-Dog are in Atlanta trying to find Merle, they find evidence that Merle cauterized his bloody stump from when he sawed off his hand with a burner in the back of like a kitchen of some sort, where he just turned on a fire, like a flame run burner, and just cauterized it. I mean, that's some painful ass shit. I honestly don't know how he maintained consciousness. It's during this quest that Glenn is captured by a gang in the middle of the city and held as basically a hostage. But the facade of this gang kind of falls flat when Rick realizes that they're actually just caring for abandoned patients at a nursing home. Basically, all the faculty and staff fled when the world went to shit and basically left all of these elderly people to die. And so this gang is they actually have a really sweet sentiment of keeping these people alive and protecting them. And and their group just keeps getting bigger and bigger because of survivors that are coming to this location to check on their family members and make sure they're okay, which is actually really sweet. So at first the gang demands that Rick hands over a bunch of guns that he swiped from the police station in episode 1 when he set out for Atlanta. It's this massive bag with tons of guns, but when they find out the nursing home thing, that doesn't exactly go as planned. There's no shootouts or anything like you think there's going to be. In fact, now that I think about it, that's a really good subversion of traditional like tropes. When Rick finds out about this admirable sentiment though and this goal of this gang, he does hand over some of the guns, but obviously keeps a good bit of them in exchange for Glenn, who they also return to Rick. And when we get there, we find that Glenn is also helping these people. It's really sweet, and there's a reason why Glenn is a fan favorite character. In my opinion, in the duration of the show that he is in, because I'm only talking about for spoilers for season 1, so I'm not going to talk about anything that happens later, but for the portion of the show that he is in, he is always a beacon of hope for everybody, and I honestly don't think he gets enough credit for how far the group has come. Back at the camp, Jim is still digging all of these holes, and he eventually reveals when he's restrained by Shane due to causing a panic in the survivors that his wife and son were brutally taken from him and eaten by walkers right in front of him, and that's the only reason why he escaped. It's really sad. Shane also beats the living shit out of Carol's husband, Ed, who again is a character that the vast majority of people who watch the show have probably forgotten about at this point, but he beats the shit out of him for being abusive to Carol. But it obviously gets to a point where you definitely feel that Shane is taking out a lot of his anger in regards to the Rick and Lori situation out on Ed's face. He doesn't kill Ed, but he does beat him within an inch of his life. And that night, Ed is alone in his tent, and he thinks somebody from the survivor group is trying to enter the tent, and then he opens it, and it turns out it's a walker, and he gets eaten the fuck alive, which, you know, I mean, I can't say that I didn't want that to happen. What I didn't want to happen, though, was this entire group to be attacked, because yes, a whole crowd of walkers attacks this camp, and we lose a good amount of people, most namely Andrea's sister, Amy. It is one of the saddest moments of the show thus far, and it genuinely got me to shed tears this time when I was rewatching it. I forgot how traumatic some of the deaths early on in the show truly are. And later on in the show, but we'll talk about that when we get to it. Rick, Daryl, and Glenn and the whole group that went to rescue Merle, obviously unsuccessfully, come back just in time to kill all of these walkers, but not just in time to save some of the people who died, because a good amount of people died. And it's at the end of this episode when Jim remembers his dream and why he was digging all of those holes, because he dreamt that this exact attack was going to happen. It's at this point that it's revealed that Jim was bitten in the attack, and Rick proposes that they head to the CDC because he is under the impression that if there's any government left, if the military would make any effort to protect any organization within the United States in this kind of a, you know, pandemic post-apocalyptic event, it would be the CDC. The CDC would probably be the most heavily protected organization in the nation. Shane is, of course, opposed to this, and they take a little hike into the woods to sort of talk about it while also hunting for food. And we see that Shane considers shooting Rick. When they hear something, they both split off to try to flank it, and then Shane gets Rick in his eyesight, aims his gun, and you can tell he's considering shooting him. He thinks that that would just, you know, end all of his problems. Obviously, it wouldn't. And Dale does stumble upon him as he's doing this. And, you know, Shane tries to brush it off like, oh, yeah, no, I thought I saw something else. You know, I didn't mean to be, I wasn't going to shoot him. I didn't mean to be pointing it at him. And you can tell Dale has a very good bullshit detector because he doesn't buy a word of it, though he keeps his mouth shut on it for the rest of this season. Eventually, Shane does cave into Rick's plan, and the group heads out to try to find the CDC. And along the way, they try to nurse Jim into health as much as they possibly can, but there's not really much you can do after you've been bitten by a walker, and that's really the first time in this show that this group learns the full weight of that. And so they give in to Jim's wishes to be left on the side of the road under the shade of a tree so that he can be with his family after death. It is a truly heartbreaking send-off to a very minor character in the show that did leave a massive impact. So the group gives in to Jim's wishes. They don't leave him with a gun or anything. They're just gonna let him succumb naturally, and they continue heading to the CDC. When they get there, it is littered with bodies all throughout it. For all accounts and purposes, it seems like the CDC plan is no longer a good one because it seems that everyone is dead, nobody is there, nobody's responding, but Rick, despite the rest of the group telling him that it's not worth it, there's nobody here, it was a wild goose chase, there's nothing going on here, he catches that the security camera is moving. So Rick pleads for his family and everyone's trying to pull him back, and it's honestly really sad because you think it's hopeless, but you see that camera moving. And the moment that the door opens, just the music and the way it builds in the filmmaking, it is so good, and something that I think later in the show they kind of did away with, unfortunately to its detriment. That door opens and it's like the pearl gates of fucking heaven. That light is so bright, and that's where our episode ends. In episode 6, we get a little bit more context on the Lori and Shane situation through a flashback, which takes us back to the very moment that Rick was left in the hospital. Shane did everything he could to try and save him, but he's hooked up to all this machinery. He's probably afraid if he unhooks him from it, he'll just die. So he is left with no choice but to barricade his hospital room door with a stretcher that he puts in front of it. And it is no pretty sight or easy thing to watch. They are slaughtering people in the halls that have the infection. The hospital is being overrun from the outside. It is genuinely grueling stuff. And you kind of do sympathize with Shane in this moment. He didn't really have much of a choice. And I honestly don't blame him for thinking that Rick is dead, but it is obviously still antagonistic of him just in regards to the narrative because he did not have confirmation. When he left Rick, he was still hooked up to the machinery, and although the machinery went out and he leaned down to hear a heartbeat, he didn't hear anything. He did not know for certain, especially with all the chaos going on, that Rick was dead, and yet he still decided to tell Lori, yeah, Rick is dead. Nevertheless, it does add more context to it and adds a little bit of a gray area to the narrative. Even though the show is very much not trying to get you on the side of Shane, it's simply trying to get you to see things from his perspective. The group enters the CDC where there is one doctor there, and this is one of the best moments in the entire show. I forgot how much I loved this moment. You know, at first it's very tense. Everybody's like, why is it only you here? What's going on? Where's all the other doctors? He informs them of the very sad news that a lot of them either, you know, opted out or went to be with their families, and everyone's basically dead now. For sure, he is the only one still here, and although everyone's very disappointed, this doctor does agree to let them stay after a few blood tests and also presenting them with luxurious housing. And this is so cathartic, not only for the characters, but also us as viewers. I love this moment so much because you've seen the gritty, grimy world that this world has become in the midst of this apocalypse, and then getting to see these characters that you've come to care about and value so much be in a clean, sanitary area with furniture, and it's underground and it's safe, and they get to take showers, and everyone just, you know, they get to sleep comfortably. There's couches and there's a rec room and there's books, and you know, it's like luxurious living. It's really nice. And I just love it when post-apocalyptic media does that, where it gives our characters moments of levity where they find a safe haven, even if it's just for a little bit. I just love the feeling of that, and I don't think people talk about it enough. Things do get very tragic later on in this episode, though, when Dr. Jenner, who is the sole doctor left here at the CDC, reveals to them what is basically going on, which is that this is a vicious disease that kills you, and then it reignites your brain, or just the brain stem. I kind of forgot all the scientific lingo of it. Basically, you are not you anymore after you die and come back to life. You're basically just a host, and it just moves you around to feed on others. He depicts all of this to them through a video diagram that is sort of operates like an x-ray of a patient that he was experimenting on, who is shot in the head at the end of the diagram, and it is revealed that that was Jenner's wife, which gives his character some pretty heartbreaking emotional context. Most important piece of information after all this, though, is that it shows the disease to be completely incurable, which is a pretty big blow for this group to take, especially after everything they went through and how happy they were to finally have some good, luxurious, sanitary living, even if it was just for 1 or 2 nights. Now, there is a big thing that I kind of skipped over that I just realized, so I do want to talk about it. While Lori is sort of chilling in one of these rec rooms, you know, looking at a book and whatnot, Shane comes in and, you know, it's this scene that I think people tend to forget when they start to defend his character, because, he literally assaults her. Like, there is no denying what he was going to do. Granted, he was drunk, but it doesn't excuse shit. It is very disturbing, builds up the drama and all that stuff, but it is disgusting what this guy's intentions are, especially while he's drunk. Lori leaves scratches on his face, which the group does notice the next day, but nobody really questions it. He sort of just brushes it off like, oh, you know, it's an injury I got while we were going crazy, or maybe it happened in my sleep or something. I have no idea. Anyway, eventually it is revealed that there is this self-destruct mechanism that this building, or this particular location of the CDC is equipped with, and there is a giant foreboding clock on the wall that is counting down to the moment that this is going to happen. Jenner does not reveal that it is a full self-destruct until much later, when it's kind of almost too late. He locks the group in, and those doors, as Jenner says, are designed to withstand an atomic bomb or a nuclear warhead or a missile or something like that. I don't remember the exact phrasing, but basically, this group is not getting out of there unless Jenner unlocks the doors. Jenner makes the case that all of these people should want to die this way. The air gets set on fire. It is a split second. There's no pain. You're gone and you're at peace. And a couple of the members of the group give in to his philosophy, namely Andrea and Jackie. They are the two main people that decide to stay behind. Jenner does eventually open the doors, and there's only like 4 minutes left. So everybody else besides Andrea and Jackie and Dale, which we'll talk about in a second, rush out to get their stuff and try to break out of this building, even though it's on full lockdown. And the only way they're going to break out is if they break the bulletproof glass. In order to essentially guilt trip Andrea out of not unaliving herself, Dale stays behind and says that he is also going to die if Andrea chooses not to go, which effectively does guilt trip Andrea into escaping with everybody else. Rick uses a grenade to break the glass at the front of the building, and everybody escapes within an inch of their life. Dr. Jenner and Jackie do stay behind and are content, passing away in this very quick, very painless fate, and it is honestly quite beautiful. The group all piles into the RV as the CDC blows up completely. It is actually a very cool special effect still to this day. Yeah, it doesn't look real at all, but it's so stylistically done, and especially in the context of the show as you're watching it, the build up to it, it's just, there's just something that just feels so high stakes about it. And it's an aspect of the show that I think the show kind of lost as it got into later seasons. But it makes for a great finale to this first season of the show. Everybody drives off to an unforeseen fate as far as viewers of this first season back in 2010 were concerned. And that, in a nutshell, is season 1 of The Walking Dead. I'm sorry I didn't go into a full beat-by-beat analysis of everything. I know there's tons of stuff you guys were probably wanting me to talk about, but it's just sort of like a general recap of events and my thoughts on certain things and all of that stuff. Guys, this season is one of the best seasons of the show. And while that's not a controversial thing to say, I think it is something that would be met with the response sort of to the effect of, well, yeah, you know, season 1 is great, but like these other, it just, you know, like these other seasons are just so good. Like these are really the best seasons. And it's like, let us not forget that we wouldn't have those later seasons without this first season. This laid the foundation for the empire that the show became. You know, upon rewatching it for the first time in years, I genuinely forgot how incredible this first season was. It is so well written. It's very tightly paced. Every episode means something. Nothing is filler. There's no slow moments at all. There's always constant forward moving progression. It is such a fast paced season of television, which is why it only needed to be 6 episodes long. They set up some really, really awesome character dynamics, and once again, the filmmaking this early on in the show was so good. In later seasons, it kind of just feels like they just used, you know, basic coverage and they weren't really putting as much artistic direction into it. That is not something you can say for this first season. This is such an artistically merit-worthy season of television. The filmmaking is top-notch, the performances are top-notch. It really solidified this as an iconic cast of survivors for us to continue to follow in later seasons, particularly season 2, which I will be talking about in my next video on The Walking Dead, which you can expect, well, after I'm done binging season 2 of the show, which I believe is 13 episodes. All the horror aspects of this were also insanely well done. The set design, the production design, the music, the direction, and of course, the costume and makeup design for the walkers. It's the most iconic design for the undead that I think has ever been put to screen. I think it gets a little more iconic in later seasons, but there's definitely something to be said for what this first season built, like the foundation that it laid for horror and special effects makeup for the future of television and this show as a whole. So guys, yeah, sorry if that was a little choppy or if I skipped over a couple things. You know, I'm just looking at the Wikipedia beat-by-beat recap of each episode, and it's not the most thorough of things, and this also wasn't a scripted video because I like the idea of just sitting down and talking about something and then hitting stop and then just exporting it and editing it. You know, I think it's just the most genuine form of content creation. Not to say that a lot of work doesn't go into this, a lot of it does, getting the setup to look good and all of that stuff. I take a shower before each and every video to make sure my hair looks fine and that I don't look like a fucking grease ball. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed the video. Look forward to my next episode in the Walking Dead series, in which I'm going to be talking about season 2. Might be a while because I'm working on a bunch of other stuff as well, but it definitely will happen. And by the end of it, when I've covered all 11 seasons of the show, I will splice it all together in one big supercut for people who would rather watch it like that. Granted, that's probably not going to happen until like the end of the year, maybe. Guys, be sure to subscribe to the channel and also leave a like and leave a comment. That stuff is much appreciated. Thank you for all the support you've been giving me recently. It truly does mean the world to me. Be sure to check out the Headspace Podcast, now available mainly on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, but pretty much any podcast streaming platform where you prefer to stream. Thank you so much, as always, for watching. I will see you in the next video, and until then, keep writing, keep shooting, and keep editing.